Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tamiko Brown-Nagin, Dean of the Harvard Radcliffe Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome you, whether you're joining us online or in person, to this afternoon's keynote conversation with Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey. Thank you for joining us today. Today's program is the opening session of Radcliffe's annual gender conference, this year titled Gender in Politics, Navigating Power and Perception, and co-sponsored by the Women in Public Policy program at the Harvard Kennedy School. We're grateful for their partnership, and I'm very glad to welcome their staff and faculty who are joining us today. Before I introduce today's program, allow me to offer some thanks. I'm grateful to the conference's faculty organizers, Vice Provost for Special Projects, Sarah Bleich, and Albert Pratt Professor of Business and Government, Iris Bonet, who also co-directs the Women in Public Policy program. Thank you as well to Executive Director Nicole Carter-Quinn. And thank you to all the staff at the Women in Public Policy program and here at the Radcliffe Institute who helped to make this convening possible. I'm also grateful to acknowledge the Perrin, Moorhead Grayson, and Bruns Grayson Dean's Leadership Fund for Academic Ventures, which is supporting this conference. Finally, thank you to the members of the Radcliffe Institute Leadership Society and all our annual donors who keep Radcliffe's programs free and open to the public, and we thank you. 2024 is a significant year for politics, both here in the US and around the globe. Dozens of countries, home to billions of people worldwide, will have held elections by the year's end, leading The Economist to deem 2024 the biggest election year in history. Or, as the Washington Post put it, this isn't just an election year, it's the year of elections. Against this backdrop, our convening will examine the intersection of politics and gender, including the important issues of power, perception, and representation. Just 4 years ago, we marked the centennial of women's suffrage in this country. It's an important reminder of the barriers to political engagement and representation that women, among many other groups, have faced across our history. There has been significant progress, yet challenges persist. Women's representation in politics has increased, but they remain underrepresented at all levels of decision-making worldwide, to quote an analysis by UN Women. The US offers one example of both the progress made and the work that remains. For example, a record number of women are serving in Congress and as state governors, yet women only hold 28% of congressional seats, and only 12 governors are women. And across the nation, there have been significant increases in the number of LGBTQ+ people in elective office, but still, fewer than 1% of elected officials were known to be LGBTQ+ in 2023. Over the course of this conference, we'll hear from former and current office holders, including this afternoon's distinguished speaker. We'll also engage scholars, journalists, and activists as we consider not only formal politics, but also grassroots political engagement and the ways in which gender and politics intersect across this broad landscape. To begin these important conversations, we're very fortunate to be joined this afternoon by path-breaking woman leader, Governor Maura Healey. Maura Healey is the 73rd governor of Massachusetts. She is the first woman and the first openly LGBTQ person elected to this position. As governor, she's committed to making Massachusetts more affordable, equitable, and competitive. In her very first year in office, Governor Healey created the Office of Climate Innovation and Resilience and appointed a cabinet-level climate chief, the first such position in the country. Also, in her first year, she signed into law Massachusetts' first tax cuts in 2 decades, which included an expanded child and family tax credit. Governor Healey also has made permanent free school meals for K-12 students, introduced a free community college program for residents aged 25 and older, and invested in apprenticeships and other career pathways. In addition, she's worked to protect reproductive rights and to make childcare more accessible and affordable for families, and she recently introduced an historic housing bill to improve housing affordability and availability in the state. Before her election as governor in 2022, she served 2 terms as Massachusetts Attorney General, where she worked to address urgent issues, including the climate crisis, the opioid epidemic, student loan debt, and rising healthcare costs. Prior to that, Governor Healey served as a litigation partner in an international law firm, and for 2 years after college as a starting point guard on a professional basketball team in Austria. She is a graduate of Harvard and Radcliffe Colleges and Northeastern University School of Law. Thank you so much for being with us, Governor. Governor Healey will be joined in conversation by award-winning journalist Alison King. Alison is currently a resident fellow at the Institute of Politics at Harvard Kennedy School. She is also the Goldsmith Fellow at the Kennedy School's Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy, where she is studying how the collapse of local political journalism impacts presidential primary campaigns. She brings more than 30 years of experience in the broadcasting industry, the majority of which she spent covering politics in New England. From 1995 until her retirement from television in 2023, she led the local, state, and regional political coverage for NBC Boston Nesson. She's covered 7 presidential elections and has interviewed every Republican and Democratic presidential candidate since 1996. Alison has also produced and reported 3 documentaries, the most recent of which is an 11-part series titled Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of New Hampshire. She's the recipient of numerous awards for her reporting, including from the Emmys, Gracies, and Associated Press. She's a graduate of Colgate University and New York University. Thank you, Alison, for joining us as well. After Governor Healey and Alison's conversation, Nicole Carter-Quinn, Executive Director of the Women in Public Policy Program, will join our speakers on stage and open the floor to audience questions. Whether you're watching us in person or online, you can submit your questions using the Slido link provided on the screen behind me and posted in the chat feature of the Zoom webinar. And now please join me in warmly welcoming Governor Maura Healey and Alison King to the stage.
Well, thank you for that very lovely welcome. Thank you to the Dean and to everyone associated with the Harvard Radcliffe Institute for hosting this. Put this down here. Oh, falling apart here. Got my glasses. So happy to be here in this great company. And to, of course, have this conversation with the governor. Gender and politics. Nothing to talk about there, right? No. So let's jump in. Governor, I remember sitting down with you in the fall of 2022 when you were running for governor, and we did a little "This Is Your Life" type conversation. Do you remember it? Say yes. We were at a restaurant in Charlestown. Does that give you?
I do remember that. I do
Ding, ding,
remember
ding.
that. Allison was also the reporter who used to make all the politicians sing a song around the holidays. So I had a reprieve from that this year. I appreciate the fellowship. Thank you, Harvard, for
But she
getting
can
me out of the
sing
singing.
and balance a basketball at the same time on her hand. At the same time. All right. So at that time, I learned a lot about your upbringing, pretty sort of middle class New Hampshire family. Your parents were divorced. You had a working mom. She's a school nurse, and famously sold her wedding ring to put a basketball court in the backyard. You were a basketball standout, as we just learned. You played here at Harvard. Went on to play professional basketball. How did that upbringing influence a desire to pursue a career in politics and public office? It doesn't necessarily go a straight line there in the way I see it, but you explain.
Well, and I do remember our conversation back a couple of years ago, Allison. It's great to be here today, and it's great to be here at the Institute with everyone here and watching at home or afar. What I'd say is I never imagined being a politician. I never aspired to run for office. I didn't think that was sort of part of who I was or what I was going to end up doing. But as I tell young people I meet with regularly, things just sort of happen and unfold. And I'm really lucky that I had the experiences that I had, and I'm grateful to be in this role now. But I think growing up, I grew up in a small town. My folks are both from Massachusetts, but we were raised just over the border in New Hampshire, saw a lot of presidential candidates come through and a lot of reporters, and I had an interest in politics. But my parents probably were both involved in the community, and I think community engagement, membership on a select board, starting the historical commission or the conservation commission, serving on the planning board, library trustees, I think all of us, and my mom ended up becoming a single mom and raised the 5 of us. She would be getting breakfast and lunches packed and go off to work for the day as a school nurse, and would come home, get dinner, and often go out to a meeting that night for one of these local involvements or another. And I think from that upbringing, you learn that it's important to get involved in your community. It's important to participate in community. And I think that's one thing I really try to stress with people today. There are so many ways to serve and be involved in democracy and in government that don't require running for statewide office, that are incredibly powerful and important, and particularly important that we have gender representation and diversity across all realms of elected office. But that was probably the early route. And at the end of the day, how did it happen? I didn't want to get a real job, so to speak, after I graduated. And my captain, Becky's sister here at the Institute, thank you for your leadership. Your sister was my captain when I played, and I learned a lot from that experience. I did have the opportunity to continue on, so I did that for a couple of years. Kid from New Hampshire, chance to see the world, traveling Europe, and then decided to go to law school. But it was ultimately years later when I worked in the Attorney General's office. I worked for a female Attorney General, Martha Cloakley, the first female Attorney General in Massachusetts, and got to work on significant cases, saw the impact of that work on people, whether it was challenging successfully the Defense of Marriage Act or taking on some of the subprime lenders during the mortgage crisis who engaged in discriminatory practices. You saw the power of that office to change people's lives. That's what inspired me ultimately to run for Attorney General, and the rest is just sort of history.
Interesting you bring up Martha Cloakley, because I was going to ask you about mentors. She was certainly a mentor of yours, as your mother was. Yes. And very important, and I assume you try to mentor young people as well, obviously.
I try, but that makes me old now.
You're a mentor whether you want to be or not.
I think it certainly starts with my mom, and I think for many women, I grew up with really strong women in my family. My mom, my grandmother, who also worked as a nurse and was involved in a lot of different activities and endeavors. Strong women, they also endured a lot and a lot of challenge and demonstrated, I think, to their children resilience and perseverance. And, that's important. I think it's important to me in the job that I have now. And I'm grateful to my mom for modeling that early. So certainly, you don't have to look far for mentors in your life. I mean, generally speaking, they're folks right around you. They could be friends, they could be peers, and classmates. I benefit now from so many mentors, including my Democratic women colleagues in particular. My governor colleagues are terrific mentors, but certainly the people I worked with, yes, the first Attorney General here, who's a woman who hired me, took a shot on me and supported me. In law practice, there were women and men, and that's important because men can be wonderful, strong mentors to women as well. And I'm lucky that I had that. I had a great coach here at Harvard who was a mentor and continues to be. So, certainly I think I view it to however it may be helpful. I'm happy to talk to young women and men about what I do and careers and challenges and the like as well.
Well, you're certainly a trailblazer, and I think it bears repeating, so I'm going to say it again. The first elected female governor of Massachusetts, the first female governor, lieutenant governor team in the country, and the first lesbian governor elected in the country. Do you feel like a trailblazer? Does that weigh on you? I mean, you certainly exude confidence, but is this pressure for you in any way?
It's interesting. I ran for office for the very first time when I ran for Attorney General here in Massachusetts. I'd never run for office before. I'd never held an office before. But I decided to run, and I was sort of counted out from the outset because I was an outsider. I didn't come up through establishment. And we ran a really terrific grassroots campaign, and I benefited from the support of so many people and, ended up taking the race. But it's just to say that as I was running, what was part of it, imagine this is 2013 and 14 here in Massachusetts. We had marriage equality in the state. We had protections for LGBTQ people. And I think people, when I was running, there was a lot more commentary and intrigue about the fact that I was some former pro basketball player, which is understandable because I'm a point guard. I'm so short, right? 5'4". So they're like, well, what? That doesn't make sense. So that's what the coverage was really at the time. I got elected, and I remember the next day I started to see some of the news on that, including news from around the world. And across all the headlines, the story was first LGBT elected official and, first gay attorney general. And then I sort of began to appreciate what that meant. I'd say as I've gone on, I certainly wear it. I carry it. I mean, both as a point of personal pride, it's who I am, and all of us go through, a journey when it comes to coming out and being comfortable in one's own skin and the like. But, I'm 53 years old, and I'm at a point now where, I also see the responsibility in that, and it does mean something to me, Alison, because representation does matter. And I've learned that it's very hard to be something unless you can see it. To the extent people were able to see something in me as their attorney general or see something in me as their governor, and to the extent that gave them, or sometimes it's parents, who come up to me and talk to me about what that means for their hopes and dreams for their child, who they may be worried about, because they're a member of our LGBTQ community, right? I mean, that's important. It's also important, I remember walking into the room when I was first elected Attorney General. It was a meeting of the national attorneys general, and I was walking with my executive protection, my state trooper, and I come up upon another attorney general from another state who put his hand out and extended it to my trooper and said, welcome, hello, General. And, I think just presence in that room was important. And then later to have conversations with people who were either actively supporting or opposing in court, in litigation, marriage equality or LGBT protections in their own states. My presence, who I am, I certainly felt a responsibility to humanize that and what that experience meant, both as a woman and as a gay person. And so I pursue a lot of policies and a lot of initiatives, and I have responsibility here in Massachusetts for the well-being of nearly 7 million people, right? That's my job, is to try to make life better for everybody and be a governor for everybody. It's also the case, I feel, a particular responsibility when I walk into a room and meet a trans kid or meet, a young woman who, needs to be assured and reassured that all things are possible.
Well, it must make you feel good to know that you're able to do that too. I was thinking when you first came onto my radar screen, it was probably during the gay marriage debate when you were in the AG's office, but really it was in 2014 when you ran against Warren Tolman for Attorney General. He was absolutely, I believe, expected to win that election going into it. You went on to win that election, but I think some people didn't take you super seriously when you started out, when you first jumped into that race. You looked very young, which is, who wouldn't like that?
It's changed.
Yeah, oh gosh, not at all. But, I remember, talking about media bias too. I mean, there was definitely, people would say, oh, she's got dimples, or, it was almost like a little bit of a, oh, isn't that cute, that she's running for, I mean, do you remember that? And I remember, I was just wondering how much of an underdog did you feel at that time? Because you certainly didn't act like an underdog at all, and you went on to win, of course, but.
Well, I think here's, for me, as somebody who was a college athlete, a beneficiary of Title IX, and thank you to all who went before and fought for that, I was able to play, and in doing so, learn something about confidence, self-esteem, and even faking it when you're not feeling it, right? And so, I approached that campaign as I approached any of my sports seasons, actually. I'm just going to get after it day after day. And, try to shut out, so if you're at the foul line, any basketball fans, right? You have to shut out all the people in the back. Yes. So, you approach it that way. And that really was my attitude towards things. And I always believed I would win, because I had, actually on paper, I had the best record and resume for the job. I'd been in the Attorney General's office for 8 years. I'd led half the office, and I knew that job. Now, of course, we've seen other candidates and women with particular resumes and competencies, and we know how that's gone. So, I wasn't feeling like I was an underdog until I walked out of a debate. It was toward the very, very end. It was a chamber appearance, and it was about 2 weeks from the election. And I thought I'd done a fine job, maybe even a really good job up there addressing the chamber. And I come down and my team looks so demoralized. And what I learned that day is that the then governor had endorsed my opponent. And the then mayor of Boston had endorsed my opponent. And I was at that point down in the polls 7 or 10 points. So I went home that afternoon, and I remember I went home and I sat outside and I cried. It was the first time, because I'd worked really, really hard for over a year. Now, it all worked out. I won 63% of the vote on election day, but it was kind of a, throughout that race, I think I understood people made judgments. They underestimated me. This happens with women all the time. You are underestimated. And, I would try to use that, frankly, to my advantage in the race, and sit back in debates, or, and then strike at the right time. Not exude particular bravado about things, but just sort of be myself and just try to make my way. But I certainly, did get a comment a few times about it's great, it's great. You've got a lot of potential, and it's just not your turn. It's not your turn. It's not your time. I was encouraged to drop out of the race at one point. In fact, I was the first person in the race, and then 2 or 3 other fellows got in the race, and people were encouraging me to get out of the race, actually, which is, not unfamiliar to women in a lot of election scenarios and political scenarios. But the good news, Allison, for me, it's like I have seen such a sea change since then in the numbers of women running, the number of women of color running, of people of color running, folks who've been for far too long not at the table and not represented in elected politics. And that's a really positive, wonderful thing.
Yeah, that whole
We still
race,
have a lot of work to do, but the numbers have gone up.
that race was such a great case study of just, for young women to go for it. And, and win, lose, or draw, sometimes you do lose. But, you go pick yourself up and you go on to the next race. But
And now today, I was one of just 2 constitutional officers who were female. Now 5 out of 6 in Massachusetts are female,
we're
which
getting
is
to that, yes.
significant.
So, there's this term imposter syndrome, and, guilty, like all the way through my career. I remember when I got my first TV job, just absolutely thinking that I was completely going to be unveiled as this complete fraud who didn't know what I was talking about. And I don't know what keeps you going in those situations, but I didn't realize that so many other people suffered from imposter syndrome, especially early in your career. And now you had lots of opportunities to sort of, whether it was in basketball or just sort of leadership opportunities at the AG's office, to help build that confidence. But I tell young people it's okay to feel like an imposter sometimes. Like if that propels you or motivates you, go with it. But in any event, so I was thinking back on women's races in the state that I've covered, and I remember covering Shannon O'Brien's race for treasurer in 1998. And this was just 25 years ago or less, or 24, 25. I'm sure many of you remember this race, but she was the first woman to be elected statewide in Massachusetts at that time. This wasn't like the 1960s, or this was the 90s, almost 2000. And we were just electing the first statewide office. Now, as you point out, 5 of the 6 elected offices are held by women. So, progress is being made. Some might even say, well, clearly voters aren't weighing gender anymore, so we can take that issue off the table. Yet, when you look at our legislature, as I believe the dean just pointed out, I think it's 30% of our legislature is made up of women right now. So how do we go about getting more women into office? What can we do?
Well, it's a really important question to me, because at the end of the day, we're only going to get the best policies, the best laws, if we have everyone at the table informing that, driving that, right? Just think about all the laws that have been passed over time that would never, ever have come to be if women were at the table, for example. And that's why it's so important that we need to drive that. And we also need to look hard at and zoom out. The numbers in Congress are not good. There are 12 there are 12 women governors. 8 of us are Democrats, but that's it. That's it in the country. And, we've just got a lot more work to do if we want to be the kind of society that is truly representative and truly about getting the best policies. And in the same way, boards and C-suites look at equity now as a driver of bottom line, as a society, we benefit from diversity and representation. So we've got more work to do. The things that make it hard, you have people who are, you're hoping to have them run, you're wanting to have them run. Oftentimes, it's as with any other career, it coincides with child rearing and with child care. Even, women who are working outside of the home still bear the disproportionate burden. And if you have to run for office, you have to figure all of that out, and that makes it challenging. You have to raise money to run for office, and we know the studies there. It doesn't seem as hard for men to be able to ask for money or for people to give to men, but getting them to give to women is another story, and is more difficult. And so these are things that are real in terms of things that get in the way. I do think the more women who are running, it inspires more women to run. The more we've increased the pipeline through various seats at the local level, at the state level, you see more people running for other seats. That's important. And hopefully you can show people. And I have the benefit, I work with a lot of women, as I did in the Attorney General's office, where the majority of my team were women, including in leadership positions. The same is true, actually, in the governor's office. And, in that way, you hope to model and cement and show and provide opportunity for women to someday think about, running for some of these positions.
Right. I mean, if you look who our two leading presidential candidates are right now, you would not think we've made a whole lot of progress, but.
No. I mean, it's really appalling that the United States has never had a female president of the United States.
Yeah, and I think people, looked at, please.
But look, it was only last year that Massachusetts elected the first woman. California has yet to elect a woman. I mean, so we have work to do across the board.
Right, and I think, a lot of people look at the way someone like Hillary Clinton was treated, by the media when she ran for president, and there's no question that, if a man is assertive, a woman's aggressive. It's all those, double words that women have to deal with. And, Hillary Clinton was as were all the, female presidential candidates. There is such a bar there in terms of how to dress and how to wear your hair and what, you're going to be scrutinized for all that. And, this has been talked about and hashed over many, many times. But I think that has to change. And I have to say, it makes me so happy to see Kamala Harris out on the campaign trail now. This has been a real shift in that she'll be out in a pair of nice jeans and Converse sneakers. And I'm like, yay, that's great. That's progress right there.
Right. And I was going to ask you, because you've covered so many campaigns, over the course of time, and lots happen. I mean, I wonder, if you have observations about the way that female candidates are covered. Is it still the same, or has it changed at all?
I mean, I think it's definitely evolved from, I think even Hillary Clinton, things have evolved. I think COVID's changed so much what went on and how we cover things. And someone like Kamala Harris can do things that, other people can't, and she won't get ripped apart in the media. But I, definitely, over the decades, I remember covering Elizabeth Dole back in I think she was one of the first women to run for president and on a major ticket, or just Sarah Palin, or and I was guilty sometimes. I'd say to myself, and I'd try to catch myself, no, don't talk about how she, what she's wearing or whatever, keep it to exactly what you would talk about with a man. And, it was just so much harder for women to, just go out and walk in a parade. A guy can throw on a sweater and a shirt and a pair of jeans, and a woman has to be out there with high heels on and this is changing, thankfully, but I'm sure you can relate to this too. And just even wondering what to wear to an event. Do I wear pants to this one, or do I wear a dress to this one?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this with other women who serve, and there is just a different lens. There is just a different lens. You have to be mindful of that, whether it's the media or whether it's the public and society. There are people who are going to be looking at you and evaluating you. Not everybody, but some in a particular way because you are a woman, and so you have to be really mindful. We talk about this, about, sure, appearance, about our countenance, right? Because it's not okay to maybe not be smiling sometimes, and certain attitudes will be unfairly ascribed to that because you're a woman, or if you speak with a certain force or clarity or conviction or confidence, certain attitudes and characterizations will be ascribed to you just because you're a woman doing that. And had it been a man doing it, they would have been lauded or it wouldn't have even been noted, right? So, I mean, that is very much a reality of what we navigate every day. Silly stuff. I mean, we can't carry purses or bags with us, right? Little things. A lot of our suits, they're not made with pockets where we can put our note cards or even our phones, right? It's just like, these may sound silly to you, but in the day-to-day work of being an elected official, there are just certain things that you have to account for. Now it's good because a lot of podiums and, microphones aren't up here, so every time I march up, I have to crank it down, they sort of know. But if you saw the State House, when I was sworn in Massachusetts, we have a beautiful State House. It's old, 1780, so old that Paul Revere and Sam Adams laid the corner foundation. there's a chair that the governor gets to sit in when he was inaugurated. Well, a she comes along who's 5'4", and if you see me, my feet don't even touch the ground. So some of the trappings of, in the basic physical infrastructure, needs to change.
100%. That's so funny. I mean, it's not funny, but it's not at your expense. So I want to just double back a little bit to, you and I talked in that restaurant that you remember so well, about, your coming out around the time of maybe after graduation from Harvard and I'm wondering if you ever worried that a professional career or a career in public life could be hampered because you felt that voters, weren't ready for an openly gay candidate. Never mind if you're trans or, it could be kind of scary. I'm just wondering what you say to people now who, and times have changed, but not completely.
Yeah, I didn't come out until actually after college, and a year or two after college. And, at that time I was getting ready to go to law school. I was in law school, and then I was getting ready to go out and work at a big law firm. And I was concerned that my sexual orientation was going to limit my progress, my advancement in the firm. And, I ultimately worked through that, but I definitely felt that, Alison, at the time. And of course, then I hadn't even contemplated running for office. But I think, all of these things are things that's an experience that I think is familiar to a lot of people who've come out. And I was grateful for the fact that there were some gay people at the firm who were supportive. I am grateful that one of the male partners, he knew I was gay, and he took me under his wing. And he was, he was married, he had children, and he was just a wonderful person and made me feel comfortable. And that made a real difference to me as a young associate starting out. But, it's certainly, now I'm older, I've been in office, I've run for office, I've served, I don't really care, so it's easier for me to say now, but still, I'm mindful that that's something that definitely can inhibit a lot of people, which is why the creation of networks is really important and finding ways to support. I'll also tell you, if something bad is happening to one of us in office. It was the same when I was Attorney General, and it's just like this now as governor. If someone is having a bad day, something bad has happened in their state, it's really important that we pick up the phone or that we text, we talk to one another and show one another, love and compassion and support. And I think that's also something that's really important as we look to grow the ranks, particularly of women and LGBTQ people in
Right.
Looking to run for office and people of color, because these jobs are hard enough and isolating enough and marginalizing enough in a different respect, and so you just have to be that much more intentional about showing support.
And I think depending on what part of the country you're in, I mean, obviously in Massachusetts, it's a little bit easier than in some other parts of the country.
Yeah, I mean, that is the reality, right? I mean, look at what's happening right now with abortion, look at what's happening with trans rights, look at what's happening with LGBTQ equality, look at the efforts to, systematically dismantle affirmative action and DEI, and, we've seen a rise in anti-Semitism, a rise in Islamophobia. We've seen a rise in a lot of negative, bad stuff, right, the last few years. So I don't ever take civil rights protections for granted, and I think we constantly have to fight to ensure those protections here in Massachusetts and certainly around the world. And I think it has become a time right now where people I know people who have moved to Massachusetts because they're afraid about what's going to happen to them or their sisters or their daughters or their children in other places.
Yeah, as reporters, we have to remind ourselves constantly we are in a bit of a bubble here in Massachusetts, and this is not the way the rest of the country, to a large degree, thinks. But and last thing on this, at the end of the day, what are the effects of gender-balanced representation in government? What's been your,
Well, I mean, my experience has been you are sensitized to certain things, and that enables you to act. I mean, when I became Attorney General, one of the first things I did was institute paid parental leave. paid parental leave for a significant number of weeks, and that actually led to other constitutional office holders instituting paid parental leave. But I knew that was important for my team, and just something you bring a certain sensitivity to. In the same way, it was important to make sure that we had the right healthcare policies, the right policies around LGBTQ protections in the workplace, the right policies around making sure that we were an inclusive office, that we had sensitivity to cultural competencies and language accessibility, all sorts of things, right? So I think you bring, it matters, right? And it matters who you put around the table. We would not have had the decisions that we've had, I think, around healthcare, particularly reproductive healthcare, that we've had over the years. You remember that picture, right? Do you remember the picture of all the men in Congress standing around the table, right, when they decided to take away protections? And, it's like these things, they're less likely to happen if women, in particular, as we're talking on gender, are at the table and represented. And that's really important. They know to speak up. They know what the issues are. I mean, whereas with Secretary Raimondo recently, who's doing a terrific job as our Commerce Secretary, also a former governor, and one of the things that she's made a foundation of her work in commerce, which is about economic development and growth in the country, is childcare, because it's foundational. It's like the infrastructure, of part of the infrastructure of economy. And I think, just her ability to bring that lens, is in part because she's a woman and a mother, and she understands, what it's going to take.
Exactly. So I know you touched on this group of women Democratic governors, who it sounds like you all talk and support each other. You all seem to be focused on sort of getting things done and combating stereotypes. Tell us about that relationship and name some names.
Oh, well, it's a great group of women governors who are out there. I think about Governor Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, and she is, doing so much around access to abortion and gun safety, also promoting electric vehicles and fixing her roads and bridges. She's doing a fantastic job. I think about what Governor Lujan Grisham is doing in New Mexico, increasing access to childcare, universal school meals for children. I think about what so many of my governors are doing. Katie Hobbs growing a semiconductor industry out in Arizona, clean water rights. Governor Hochul, she's got a big program in New York around housing. And I could just go on and on about the fabulous governors who I serve with. And we do get together. We have regular meetings, and we also have just a lot of informal conversations. It's great for me to live in proximity to Janet Mills, fantastic governor in Maine, who on the first day she became governor, expanded Medicaid, changed the lives of tens of thousands of people in Maine just with that one act. And in the wake of the Lewiston shooting, I know that we were all in touch with her. I got to see her during that time, and there's just such a network, such a bond. There was recently a national security incident, and my first call was to Governor Whitmer to say, I just want to run this by you. What should I be thinking about? And to have the ability to reach out on the serious, on the substantive, and also to reach out on the personal. Many of us have kids, or others of us have had kids, and how do you navigate pickups and not being awkward as an elected official at the school play, or what do you do on date night? It's like to be able to have these conversations when you've got you know what to do, but we come with executive protection everywhere we go. So there's very funny stories about shopping with your executive protection team, but to have that network right there is so invaluable. And I'll say this, I think a reason that more women are getting elected and more women need to run is because this country needs to see what strong and steady leadership looks like and what it looks like to deliver results. Because I could go across and talk about all of my Democratic colleagues who I work with a lot, the women who I work with a lot, and it's amazing what they're getting done in their states. And I think, people, that's why they get elected. That's why we've seen an exponential increase. It's still not enough, but we've seen an exponential increase because I think people actually are so hungry for people who are going to listen to them, identify their needs, and then work on solutions and actually deliver. I mean, I think about that with our wonderful leader in Catherine Clark in United States Congress, the work that she is doing right from Massachusetts, but the way that she is leading that caucus, the things that she is actually being able to get done, whether it's incredible amounts of funding for childcare right now, for climate, for infrastructure and transportation coming back to our states, just another example of the kind of leadership that I think people are really drawn to.
So I want to get your thoughts on the role of young people in politics. Harvard actually does, the Institute of Politics does a lot of really super interesting polling on all this. If you're ever really interested, you should Google it. But there was young people really helped Joe Biden get elected in 2020. And I guess there was some concern last fall that they were dropping off in numbers. I think the latest polling shows they're ticking up a little bit. But, I have 2 Gen Zers at home, and they are done with the whole, the nastiness and the vitriol and what's going on Capitol Hill. So are we doing enough to get young people involved and to get young people, what can we do to convince young people that it is an inspiring and noble thing to get involved with?
Well, it's significant to note just the numbers. I mean, here in Massachusetts, for example, 20% of our population is 21 years old or younger, okay? An estimated 1.5 million out of 7 million people. And they are absolutely driving an agenda with energy, and they need to be involved, and we want to empower them. I set up youth councils on a variety of topics. In fact, I met with my youth council on climate just the other day. And so I think, first off, they need to be heard in government. They need to have elected officials reach out and engage with them. I love to employ young people in the office with the hope that maybe someday they'll want to work in government or go into politics. These are things we need to do, but we really do need to listen, and we also need to work on educating too, and continuing to find ways to support them. And we're going through the process right now in Massachusetts where we're reimagining what high school looks like. What is the high school? What is the K through 12 education system that meets where we are today in the world? And I've got, as governor, a big focus on things like life sciences and climate technology and applied AI. And, there are obviously so many different fields, but how are we empowering young people today in Massachusetts, setting them up for success? The amount of mental health issues that young people, I think, are experiencing seems disproportional to me from what I experienced when I was growing up. Now, maybe we didn't know enough about it, or we weren't paying as much attention to it. I don't think that's true, though. I think the advent of social media and what that has enabled has had some serious negative effects on young people in particular. And so, what are we doing to help them? In the area of climate, for example, where we see a lot of activism among young people, as well we should. I mean, we have not done what we needed to do for this generation or future generations, is to bring them in, to get them involved. And so what are the programs that I can set up as governor to create career pathways in technologies or jobs and careers that are going to help with resilience and adaptation and climate mitigation, right? So, showing people a path, giving them agency. As we move towards the election, I know that there will be and continue to be significant engagement and outreach to young people who did had a significant role in the last election. I expect them to as we move forward. And I think, I'm not going to get into positions here, but just to say that if you look at the issues, and engage with young people on the issues, the consequences, the rights that people in this country enjoy today, and the freedoms that are protected today, and what is at risk and might be lost, those things will matter and do matter to to young people. They really, really do. And so I just encourage young people to get involved. I welcome, the voices, and I'll listen to anyone and anything, and then try to bring it around to, okay, so how can you are this democracy, you're part of this is the democracy we have. So how do you want to work with it and be engaged with it?
Well, we have a couple minutes, and we're going to take some questions, which will be great. But just, final thought, I think, and, certainly relative to young people, my kids are always, making fun of me because I'm still working on pronouns and, but their whole, I think it's up to us. I mean, we need to inform ourselves. We need to, if you're confused by that or, go out and learn and teach yourself what it's all about. Mental health issues, it's young people leading the way on getting rid of this stigma. They talk about it all the time. Climate, as you mentioned. So I think that there's hope going forward, and that women, we're hopefully going into a generation where we're going to see significantly more progress.
We are. We have to fight for it, though. And, I can't close without noting that at this time in America, 1 in 3 women live in a state with a national abortion ban. And I say that not only as a matter of personal autonomy and respect for privacy and the right of a woman to make a decision for herself, I also say that as a matter of economic empowerment and economic disempowerment. And so, yes, I am hopeful. I'm hopeful because there are enough people out there who care about those things, but we have to remind people what is happening, what is at stake, and the agency that we all have. And the agency in this country comes through politics at the local level, where decisions are made about what's being taught in school, how much funding is there going to be for education, right up through Congress, right up through a presidential administration. And so, that's what we've got. That's what we've got to work through here. So I would not do this job, Alison, were I not optimistic and hopeful. I wouldn't do it. I'm ever optimistic and ever hopeful, and also mindful that, as a society, as a country, you can never be complacent, and while there have been gains made, we've got, millennia to make up for.
There you have it. Thank you so much, Governor Healey, for a really wonderful conversation. I am now going to call up Nicole Carter-Quinn, who is going to be helping curate some of the questions here, and we will hear from some questions from some of what you're all wondering about. So, Nicole, thank you for joining us.
Thank you both for that incredible dialogue. It could not be more timely. Just yesterday, we had a closing session of From Harvard Square to the Oval Office, which is a nonpartisan political training program that we run at the Kennedy School. And we have many of our students in the audience, and I see a lot of familiar faces across campus. And I welcome everybody to submit questions via Slido, whether you're in the room or the virtual audience, and I promise I'll try to get to as many as I can. And the first one comes from Vivian. What most excites you about the opportunities that Massachusetts has under your leadership? And what centers you in a role that pulls you in so many directions?
What centers me is probably being able to return home at night on some level, right? I'm very lucky to have a wonderful partner who runs an important organization that's about protecting democracy in this time, and her kids, and my nieces and nephew and family. I mean, that centers me. Seeing old friends who knew me, at 17, and, being able, that those things are important. And I think for all of us, whatever it is that fills your cup, you've got to tap into that and try to do that regularly. In terms of Massachusetts, there's so much I'm excited about, Vivian. There's so much that we were able to do in the last year, making community college free to people 25 and over, free school breakfast and lunch for kids in the state, leading on climate initiatives, going after other, important work that we're doing around infrastructure and housing, childcare. I'm proud of the fact that we cut taxes and also that we have the most generous child and family dependent tax credit in the country, making sure that we protected access to abortion and patients and providers. Looking forward, I would say that I'm really excited about the opportunities we have here to maintain our global leadership in life sciences, where we're going to cure diseases, where we're going to tackle some of the world's greatest problems, including with new areas like climate technology and applied AI. I filed a multi-billion-dollar economic development bill. We want to really lean into those industries. So that's what I'm excited about, Vivian, and I'm excited about, having a Massachusetts that's, where more people are involved, more partnership, more teamwork, private, public sector, academic, everybody working together in collaboration. We've seen the seeds of that, and I'm really excited about that, and especially excited to kick off our 250th anniversary next year, right? Where it all began, this great American democracy experiment kicked off right here in Massachusetts.
Awesome, thank you. Anisha has a question. How have you elevated the needs of marginalized people in policy issues where they typically have no voice, such as climate change or economic development?
Well, I think thank you for asking that question. You have to do it with intentionality. You can't just issue an executive order. A lot of times you can't even sign a law that accomplishes that. The way I've done it is by actually putting people at the table. On climate, for example, I created environmental justice fellows who are in 14 communities around Massachusetts. Their job day in and day out is to focus on environmental justice issues, and specifically in communities that are disproportionately communities of color, low-income communities. So that's just an example, a lens. I immediately established a Black Empowerment Council, a Latino Empowerment Council. I didn't use the words advisory council. It was about empowerment, right? It was about using those councils to help drive an agenda. So for example, we have a focus in our economic development agency on supporting not just small businesses, but micro businesses, disproportionately run by women and people of color. How do we support as a state with capital, with credits and the like? And those are just examples, I think, of, some of what there's a lot of things you get to do in government. It starts with the people you surround yourself with, and then, making sure that you are also bringing to the table for any policy discussion or initiative the perspectives of those with lived experience.
Thank you. I'm going to try to bundle a couple so that we can get to as many as possible. Apart from being a trailblazer in your own right, and apart from being a role model to all of us, what advice do you have for those of us in the room and those of us in Zoom to help uplift other women, both in political leadership, but in other ways as well?
Oh, boy, I think it's, I just think it's so important. I think it's about reaching out, compassion, empathy. These are hard jobs, and making sure that you give somebody a call when you've read a headline or watched something on a news report. You know somebody's having a hard day. You reach out and show support. I try to with my team because they go through challenges as well. So I think those things are really important to do, is to be reaching out and showing support. And making connections too. Making connections. That's part of what you can do is make connections with other people who can help people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kind of building, do more women leaders shift our societal perception of women and girls? And can representation truly lead to a shift in deeply entrenched patriarchal norms?
You want to take that?
I think you've proven that you have. Yes.
Absolutely. It's just like, it's, there are just, it's palpable. If you talk to kids, under a certain age, they're only used to, they've only been used to seeing women in certain positions, and that's cool. And they also, look at the NCAAs this year with more people watching the women's game, right? than ever before, and that's not going to change. Those numbers are going to grow even greater. So, yes, it does matter. It absolutely matters, and the number of girls and women doing things that, in classrooms, 10 years ago when I was in them, the numbers are very different. So it absolutely matters, and you can absolutely transform things in the process. It takes time, and yes, you're going to hit some setbacks and some roadblocks, but that's how change happens.
Thank you. And this question is for both of you. And it's building. There's a lot of good questions here. How do you see the role of gender evolving in politics and journalism? And what can be done to promote greater gender equality and representation?
What was the first few words of that?
How do you see the role of gender evolving in politics and journalism? Or I would say, let me add any male-dominated field in which we are entering and starting to take leadership positions.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit like the last question as well, which is that it's happening. I mean, I think there's such a generational piece to this. I see my kids and their friends, and there's just a different mindset. And again, I'm gonna point to COVID. I think COVID sort of changed so many things, including issues surrounding gender and politics, and we're seeing just so many women get involved. One of the things, when people talk about how do I take a step forward, or how do I want to do this, but I'm scared, I don't know how to, there are all kinds of schools now that you can go to learn how to run for office. And there are organizations, certainly in Massachusetts, to help you get started. How do you raise money? How do you build some coalitions? How do you learn what the whole system is in terms of, precincts and primaries and all that stuff, which, if you're a political junkie, you kind of know this and take it for granted, but most people have no idea about all of this. So I think the more people understand how it all works, it becomes easier for women and men to just sort of wrap their minds around the idea of getting involved and jumping in. So I think younger people are going to really make a big difference in that regard.
I'm really interested to hear your response to that question. And I was just thinking about it, as a person who's on the other side of the microphone, one of the things I notice when I'm doing a press conference or in a scrum with reporters is, that's the opportunity for reporters to just start shouting at you and asking questions. And I do notice when men are shouting over women, and sometimes I absolutely make a point to call out that woman and say, I'll take her question and then yours. That happens, and it's it's just my. But I feel like, look, if you're in these positions, then you should use your power, and you should use your power in those moments. I remember as Attorney General, when I first got elected, there was a group that came in, lobbyists, their clients, they surrounded the table, they were going to talk about some issue, and every single one of them made a point of shaking my hand and then sitting down. And I looked around, and they were all men. And then across from me at the other end of the table was a woman, a younger woman. And I actually knew from my days in the law firm who it was who had done all of the work. So I said, I'm sorry, we weren't introduced. I'm Maura, you're so-and-so, great. Why don't you tell me the issue? Needless to say, when those people returned later with other clients on other matters, they did not make that mistake again. And I think that's part of gender and politics, you have to know in the moment, and you're not always gonna get it right. How many times have people said something to you, but I'm sure pushed you out of the way? You've had politicians probably say certain things to you. I still get called kiddo sometimes, right? And I'm sure, it's and you have to pick, this is part of the thing, when do you engage? People have said stuff to you that I'm sure is misogynistic and sexist.
Well,
when do you get...
And, you've made this point earlier, just the importance of seeing people, not just reading about it, but seeing someone. So when I first came to Boston in the mid-'90s, it was a lot of white men running the show in the journalism field, except for one woman, and many of you may know who she is, Janet Wu. She worked at Channel 5, and she had already been around the block for like, I don't know, 10 years before I showed up on the scene. And she, I was a little timid and intimidated by some of these, I don't know if you guys remember John Henning and Andy Hiller and John Keller, and oh my God. And I saw her jump in through the crowd and start firing questions, and it sort of emboldened me to be able, I thought, well, if she can do that, but I needed to see that, so, definitely helps.
Thank you both. I'm gonna bundle this. This has come up a lot, actually, through the course of the semester with our students, and I think this is an important question. I want to pose it to both of you, both as a political leader and a leader in journalism. How can we encourage young people to run for office given the threat of political violence, especially in a time of such anti-LGBTQ and anti-gender backlash?
Well, as I told you, I have 2 kids, and one of them has sort of toyed with maybe doing politics down the road. And it's interesting because I'm the biggest cheerleader for someone to run and go for it. But when when it came to my son, I was like, oh, it's so nasty right now. No, I have completely encouraged him, but I had to sort of, my first instinct was, is this, this can be sort of a nasty business, and especially where we are right now, it's even different than 5, 10, never mind 15 years ago. So I think, you have to be brave, you have to be courageous about it, and, and just go for it. I think that I think that while there has been violence recently, which is scary, and it's, I think for the most part, if you, keep your head down and do the job, I think there are a lot of, it's a lot of outlier situations. We see the headlines of the violence, but I think if you want to run for city council, I don't think you have to worry about, the violence of it all. But I don't know, what would you say, Governor?
Oh, I have a lot to say. We need you to run. We need you to run, and we need you not to be deterred by what's happening. But the reality is bad stuff is happening, and it's happening at all levels. Look at the people who just were doing the civic duty of going as a poll worker, something that was supposed to be non-controversial. Look at the numbers of county election officials who've quit, secretaries of state who've left, and at local offices who have been run out. It's real. Look at what has happened with the advent of so much of what's possible on the platforms, with doxing, with social media, now with deepfake AI that is disproportionately targeting women and young girls. So what do we need to do? We need to call it out. We need to stamp it out. There's no tolerance for violence. We've got to get right as a society. We can have differences of opinion, but we've got to get back. Some things have been normalized in society in this country that are not to be normalized and that impinge and interfere with people's willingness to run and our democracy. So we've got to be clear about that. We've got to speak to that, and we've got to oppose it when we see it. And I call on the platforms as well to get in the game, whether it's now as we face elections or as we talk about the preservation of our great democracy or the protection of individual rights and liberties. It's not just up to government. Government alone can't get this done. We need everyone at the table. It's worth fighting for.
I'm going to pose just one final question, and I kind of wanted to end with that because that was so aspirational. But I have one more, and for both of you. Thank you for highlighting the challenges that you face in a world that was literally designed by men for men. What role can policy, and I'm going to extend it to journalism, what role can policy and journalism play in building a safer world for everyone?
Well, journalists we need to get away with this notion of fake news. People need to figure out what news is the right news, and you need to do your homework on this. You need to find out what is trustworthy and reasonable and honest journalism, and there are so many people. This is a whole other, road to go down, but there's so many people who are just following their own, ideological silos of news and never look beyond their backyard to see what's going on, or if what they're consuming is real or accurate. So I think that, that's something I'm really focused on, is trying to educate people, or helping, people to figure out what news sources they can trust and follow in a world where right now everything it's really hard to tease it out sometimes.
I think that's really important, and I really appreciate your scholarship and focus right now on community reporting, because I think, one of the things we suffer from right now is people's distrust in government, and, one way to build that back is through community reporting and community newspapers and community journalism, because you see what's happening in your community. So if the coverage is accurate and a reflection of what you see, you there have more trusted news and in media. And I couldn't agree with you more about the need to make sure that there is accurate reporting. Also, what you choose to report too, what you choose to highlight, who you choose to amplify and focus on. That's also something I think the media, can do a better job of. If we look back in the last, few elections, for example, maybe folks have learned the lesson. I don't know, but that matters too, because there's a choice with everything. And then for us, I think we just need to do all that we can to really support and stay strong and stay true to certain values and principles, notwithstanding of course, any number of differences that we should be allowed to have and respect in one another. And I think it's really important, particularly in this time, that we protect and advance women, and we do that through representation, and that extends beyond women, of course. But, I just look at climate right now, right? Look at the people who are affected most by climate. It's low-income people, communities of color, women and children. Look at the global migration that we're seeing and who's having to flee, and what's happening. And so, as people who are disproportionately bearing the burden of so much, I think that, the louder the voice and the more prominence, the more presence there, the better the policies are going to be in the first place.
Thank you. Thank you for being a role model for all of us and having this conversation with us today. Dean Nagin.
And in closing, I want to say thank you to Governor Healey for being here and for being such an inspiration. Thank you to Alison King for being such a professional and for all of your commentary. And thank you to Nicole Carter-Quinn and to everyone in the audience for your fantastic Q&A. Our conference on gender and politics will continue tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in the Knaufel Center and on Zoom. We will hear from activists, journalists, scholars, and current and former office holders and trailblazers from the field, and I hope you'll join us. Thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.